William Lane Craig is the grand poobah of Christian apologists. He's the Big Mac, the daddy of the Mac, and the Mac Daddy. In fact, he's been named among the 50 most influential living philosophers. He's written many notable works and debated countless atheists, oftentimes winning, which is bizarre and unsettling. It seems to make a case not for the existence of the biblical God, but for the trickster god Loki. To see what I'm talking about, let's take a look at how Craig addresses three key issues in these debates: the resurrection, the so-called problem of evil, and the genocide of the Canaanites. Buckle up, because we're going on a ride through the loopiest logic this side of the Bible Belt. Beginning with Craig's takedown of Bart Ehrman concerning the probability of the resurrection against our background knowledge, that is, our everyday experience and understanding of the world.
Notice that Dr. Ehrman just assumes that the probability of the resurrection on our background knowledge is very low. But here I think he's confused. What, after all, is the resurrection hypothesis? It is the hypothesis that Jesus rose supernaturally from the dead. It is not the hypothesis that Jesus rose naturally from the dead. That Jesus rose naturally from the dead is fantastically improbable. But I see no reason whatsoever to think that it is improbable that God raised Jesus from the dead.
What a stellar point. We don't tend to witness people naturally rising from the dead, but supernaturally. Well, of course, why didn't you say so? You can barely walk your dog or stroll through the produce section without bumping into a reanimated corpse these days. Aunt Wilma died years ago in a freak accident during a cyanide gurgling contest. Now I see her all the time at bingo. These Night of the Living Dead scenarios would strike me as odd, but it's hardly surprising in the face of magic.
Faster, quick!
Go back to your mama!
¡Payaso, hacelo!
Diablo!
On our background knowledge, natural resurrections are weird and uncommon, but supernatural resurrections are just something that happens from time to time. Jesus' resurrection belongs to the latter. So it's highly plausible right out the gate and shouldn't take much evidence to convince you. Moving on to the problem of evil.
So what arguments did Professor Ridley give to show that God does not exist? Well, I basically heard only one, namely the problem of evil. This is not the best of all possible worlds. Well, certainly all of us need to face the problem of evil, and any account of evil must begin with this question: what is evil? I maintain that evil is a departure from the way things ought to be. I can think of no more reasonable definition of evil that captures our shared intuitions. But if we agree that there is evil in the world, and that evil is a departure from the way things ought to be, then we must also agree that there is a way things ought to be. But if there is a way things ought to be, then there must be some transcendent design plan or purpose that determines how things ought to be. And so there must be some transcendent being, a creator in fact, whose will is the basis for how things ought to be. And hence evil is actually evidence that God does exist. If atheists are right and God does not exist, then there is no design plan, hence no way things ought to be, hence no departure from the way things ought to be, and hence no evil. But does anyone here really want to claim that evil does not exist?
So Craig defines evil as a departure from the way things ought to be, a definition shared by secular philosophers in such works as nowhere and not ever. Conspicuously, you only find this definition of evil among evangelical apologists. Why? Because it's an ad hoc definition that they made up to formulate an argument for God. Look just about anywhere else and you'll find evil defined as that which causes harm, misfortune, or destruction, or some variety thereof. On naturalism, that's not a departure from the way things ought to be. That's just a cold, hard reality that we prefer to keep to a minimum based on compassion for those who suffer. It only ought to be a departure from some grand design if there is a grand designer. Thus, Craig and Company provide that very strategic definition. But if evil is a departure from God's design per their definition, then why doesn't God intervene accordingly? Because of free will? Seemed he had no problem thwarting the free will of Pharaoh when chasing down Charlton Heston. And how does free will apply to natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, disease, etc.? Are those the result of the fall? That fateful day when a snake tricked a rib woman? I guess that settles it. Snakes will talk. Lastly, we get to Craig's defense of genocide, which is truly heartwarming.
Moreover, if you believe as I do in the salvation of infants or children who die, what that meant was that the death of these children meant their salvation. They were the recipients of an infinite good as a result of their earthly phase of life being terminated. The problem is that people look at this from a naturalistic perspective and think life ends at the grave. But in fact, this was the salvation of these children and would be far better for them than continuing to be raised, say, in this reprobate Canaanite culture. So I don't think God wronged anybody in commanding this to be done. He didn't wrong the adults because they were deserving of capital punishment. He didn't wrong the children, if there were any that were killed, which we don't know, because God has the right to take their lives, and in fact, they were the recipients of a great good. So I don't think there was anybody that was morally wronged in this affair.
Those lucky little fucks, they got an express ticket to heaven. Only the tickets were more like daggers, which were punching holes in them instead of the other way around. Of course, the Old Testament never says all dead Canaanite children go to heaven, because the Hebrews of that time had no conception whatsoever of an infinite plot in a celestial dreamland. For them, it was simply a return to the dust. See Genesis 3 and Psalm 90. But if your name is Billy Craig and you like long walks on the beach with the Lord and manipulating data to suit your needs, just read the New Testament into the Old and pretend that it says what you want it to say. Never mind that even then your rationale would support endless war and genocide for the sake of carting kids off to the afterlife. Nothing about that is horrible. If this is the best that Christianity has to offer, I'd sure hate to see the worst. Apologists like William Lane Craig are not objective seekers of truth. They like to play with the tools established by Western rationalism, but only to erect a facade. It's never a matter of allowing facts and logic to lead them to an ineluctable conclusion. It's always about starting with a conclusion, the one that affirms their faith, and then designing an argument that leads to that desired outcome. That isn't truth-seeking. That's truth-selecting. It's theology masquerading as philosophy. And that's fine if you like being comfortably deluded. But as for me and my house, we will follow philosophers who don't play word games and don't celebrate children getting murdered. Hey guys, if you're enjoying my content, please like and subscribe and consider contributing to my Patreon. Things have been a little difficult for me financially lately, and whatever help that you can provide will go a huge way toward helping me grow this channel and making this eventually a full-time endeavor. So please consider supporting me in whatever way you can. And if you can't, hey, just giving me the views, the likes, the subscribes, that much I am truly grateful for.